I hope the meal, and welcome back to this second lecture day. This is the question and answer part of the discussion today. And so this session is scheduled to last at least to 3 p.m., but if we don't last that long, that's probably a good thing. But so we'll go is Dr. Paul next to me. He is our Vice President of Intellectual Formation and our Dean. And he has collected the questions, and he will be presenting those questions to this panel. And he will give a description of who our panelists are very shortly. Dr. Paul was also very instrumental in helping, as part of the lecture committee and team, developing the topic for today, as well as formatting the questions as well. And so our two panelists here, the way this will work is they will are given 5 minutes at the beginning of this lecture to respond to the talk that Cardinal Turkson gave. And then Cardinal Turkson, as he jokingly said, I agree with everything I said. Or with and so now, so let me take this and present Dr. Paul Munson.
So good afternoon, everyone. Allow me to read something for you. As an instrument of providence, society must see that God's plan is not impeded. God certainly desired that all of his children here below might habitually find the means for sustaining their physical lives and their intellectual and moral lives. Man must find the daily bread for himself and his family. He has the right to respect for his dignity, to an adequate share of education and freedom, and to the ability to worship and to serve God. Society may neither violate those rights nor permit others to suppress them. It has the mission of protecting humanity in its dignity and rights, and not of enslaving it. Those are the words of Father Leo John Dehon from his book, The Social Catechism. Here's our library's copy right here, from 1898. Now, Father Mark introduced me as academic dean, but as many of you know, I'm also associate professor of church history. So, of course, I have to give you the date of the Social Catechism. But as we are about to embark on a wonderful conversation, I'm sure, I appreciate His Eminence's situation on Dehon's life in terms of the encyclical tradition of Catholic social teaching, and then that arc to the present. And something I'd like for us to keep in mind, this came up at the lunch conversation. Father Leo John Dehon was born in 1843, the same year the Diocese of Milwaukee, which was pretty much all of Wisconsin, was established. He died in 1925. Imagine living between the years 1843 and 1925. A lot changes. A lot changes. And so we're asking ourselves questions about those changes since Leo John Dehon's Social Catechism. And joining His Eminence, are two wonderful guests. So first we have Ms. Catherine Orr. She serves as an associate at Lumen Christi Parish in Mequon, and as the program coordinator for the Roundtable Association of Catholic Diocesan Social Action Directors. She has worked in ministry for over 10 years in a variety of diocesan and parochial roles. She is passionate about how the embodiment of Catholic social teaching is a way to live out her baptismal call of discipleship. She also serves with the Catholic Charities USA, Parish Social Ministry Leadership Team and on the board of directors for the Catholic Labor Network. She and her husband, Matt, have been married for 9 years, and together they have 3 children, James, Madeline, and Daniel, who's only 9 months old. It's also important to point out that she's a student in Sacred Heart's Coronum, Coronum Masters. The dean should know that, right? It's amazing how embarrassed you get in front of a microphone. In the, what's now the senior cohort, actually. So we are very honored and delighted to have a current student here to give her perspective from her great experience. Cardinal's right to his, however you want to take that. Is my Dr. James Stroud. Dr. James Stroud, STD, is an associate professor of moral theology here at Sacred Heart Seminary and School of Theology. This is 9 Sacred Heart, teaches in the area of fundamental moral theology, biomedical ethics, social ethics, and philosophical ethics. He has published articles on moral theology and the intersection of moral theology and scripture. He's an active member of the Academy of Catholic Theology, the Sacra Doctrina Project, the American Catholic Philosophical Association, and Milwaukee's Archdiocesan Healthcare and Bioethics Committee, and a member, if I'm not mistaken, of St. Stanislaus Parish. James and his wife Catherine have been married for 17 years, and together they have 8 children: Cecilia, Felicity, Elizabeth, Teresa, Bridget, Thomas, whose birthday's tomorrow, Anastasia, and Amelia, which is pretty much the whole Roman canon. He is currently working on an edited volume on John Paul II, St. John Paul II's 1993 encyclical Veritatis Splendor, with contributions from 10 other scholars. So what we'll do here is each of our guest panelists here will offer 5 or 10-minute responses to the Cardinal's lecture. The Cardinal will then have the opportunity to respond to them, and then we'll open it up to the many questions you put in that box. We have plenty. If I did not select yours, you can blame me, but trust me, I have about at least 40 up here, so we're not going to get through all of them. So, without further ado, Dr. Stroud.
I'm taking the privilege of going first, so thank you. First, thanks to Cardinal Turkson for his excellent commentary, address, in thinking about a social catechism for the 21st century. And I had lots of preconceived notions about where this talk could go, and I had lots of ideas about what I could actually say, and to be honest, I was truly inspired by something he did in his presentation. And it's something that had not clicked for me, even though I have read some, not all, of Father Dehon's writings. There's substantial portions of writings, and because of the nature of it, a lot of it covers the same kinds of things to different audiences. So when his social catechism comes out, when you look at that kind of document, you realize it's filled that in the teaching of local parishes and the teaching of universities and other kind of places, they don't have a text like that, right? They don't have the compendium of Catholic social doctrine that we do from the 2004 work that was done. They don't have the Catechism of the Catholic Church. At most, catechism and variations based upon the Roman Catechism, which comes up. And so there really isn't like a substantial catechism or compendium of how to deal with the current social issues that are going on. And what with, and it's not necessarily anything radical, but what becomes novel with Leo XIII and Rerum Novarum is that he sets out in a certain way to tackle, right, the Industrial Revolution and the rise of socialism that really brings about radical social changes for all of European life and has significant ramifications for the church and for the people who make up the church, the body of Christ. And so he's trying to respond to that. And John Dehon had the same insight that there needs to be an on-the-ground way in which to catechize people, including priests, on their responsibilities in living out and teaching Catholic social teaching. So if you turn to the social catechism text, there are kind of two places he specifically addresses, these are the duties of priests. And he outlines, these are the things you should be doing. They're short sections, but there are sections like that, which made me think, in light of Cardinal Turkson's wonderful overview of things, if perhaps we already have a social catechism that's been unfolding in front of us, and that really is the encyclical tradition beginning with Leo XIII. And in some ways, if you think about it, each of those contributions of social encyclicals going back to Leo XIII and Pius XI, and then you could even include Pius XII's Christmas address and other kinds of addresses he gives. And as you unfold into John the 23rd and Paul VI and so on and so forth, you get, instead of comprehensive catechisms, you get minute catechisms focused on very specific things. And what made me really draw into this is this insight that in all of these documents, there are sections set aside for these are the responsibilities of bishops, of priests, of theologians. And so it's like a catechism from the Pope about a specific moral or social topic. And so I can't help but wonder if in some way the modern, what we call the modern Catholic encyclical, is itself a social catechism. And it's something I had not even dwelled on until this presentation kind of put that forward for me. So that's kind of like one of the insights I think that the presentation wonderfully highlighted, is that the popes have been doing this. And there are those instructive elements of, these are the things you should be doing as priests, as bishops, as pastors, and then eventually once the popes broaden the horizon, this is also the work of the laity, right? This is the work of what the lay people need to be doing. And so it's even broadened that horizon in encyclical beginning in the 1960s onwards. So that's really the first thing that kind of drew me in thinking about how to think about this topic in relation to the development of and the use of the different encyclicals. The second point really is really kind of harp on what would I say then, and this is what I had kind of preconceived notions of, what would be the duty of priests today? If you had to outline, what would be like what would be a question or a section under that for a modern social Catholic catechism for priests? What would that look like? And one of that would, I think there'd at least be several different things you could focus on. One is you have to read. You have to read and keep up with what's going on in the world. You have to be knowledgeable about the things that are happening that affect, right, not only the things that's going on in the Ukraine and Russia, but also that's affecting the things here in Milwaukee, or the things in Illinois, or the things in wherever you are, right? And so it's like you've got to know what's going on. You have to read. You can't just hear the little bits of news. You have to actually go in depth and think about, and turn to knowledgeable lay people to help inform you who are experts in these things, right? So maybe you have a lawyer at your parish who's an expert in whatever's going on. Use his advice, right? Maybe you have a journalist. Maybe you have a medical doctor, a nurse. There's so many great wealth of resources from the laity that you can draw upon. So that'd be one thing. Secondly, and this is something I've been harping on personally, and those who have been in my classes, you've seen this for better or worse, right? You can't just read current events and those kinds of things. You also have to read literature, because you get to see the human condition exposed in very unique and very powerful, persuasive ways that can truly transform human lives. I mean, there are people who encounter texts that change their whole outlook of life based upon a reading of a great book, that convinces them that there is a God, that convinces them that this is the way of life. And it's those kind of transformative experiences you see in texts and books and reading and those kind of encounter with, as one author puts it, it's like breaking bread with the dead. That you get to sit down and learn from other people and learn from their experiences and knowledge and the social conditions that shape their knowledge and experiences that can then give you resources in your own imagination to think about, how do I live, how do I teach, how do I preach here and now? While it's not like 1800s, right, Santa Fe, New Mexico, it's not like 17th or 18th century France, or it's not like 1950s Louisiana. It's, right, 2020, 2022, Milwaukee, Indiana, wherever it is. And it's, you got to think about, well, how do I imaginatively think about the conflicts, the different things that are going on in the world, and how can I learn from it, and how can I help respond to it as a priest, as a religious, as a Christian. That's our obligation as Christians in that. And in the end, we always have to remind ourselves that, and this is something that I think beautifully is there in all of the encyclical traditions, encyclical texts, and all various encyclicals, but for me, it's always most highlighted beautifully with the first, not a social encyclical, but the first encyclical of John Paul II, Redemptor Hominis, where he focuses on the Redeemer of man, the English translation of that. And where he talks about persuasively that Christ is the answer. Christ is the response. Christ is where we find salvation. And that's something that Father Dehon would have loved and recognized immediately, that the centrality of Christ and the preaching of Christ crucified has to be most central to not only the teaching of a church, but also the social teaching of the church and its tradition. And so I think as you think about what's your own responsibility, what are your duties, I hope you can at least kind of draw on the resources of this wealth, this patrimony that's been given to us, that I think the Cardinal beautifully highlighted. So, thank you.
Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you, Cardinal Turkson, for your remarks today, and just a big thank you to the community here just for the opportunity to speak. I'm very humbled to be here and just excited as a student to offer my perspective, just also as a layperson working in the church, and also as a wife and mother. But before I respond to Cardinal Turkson's talk, I'd like to actually take a step back and go back to Scripture, today's daily readings, because a couple of things that really stuck out for me, and I thought just kind of really set a nice tone for the Cardinal's talk. And the first was, much will be required of the person entrusted with much, and still more will be demanded of the person entrusted with more. And I'm going to read that one more time because I just want everybody to focus on that. Much will be required of the person entrusted with much, and still more will be demanded of the person entrusted with more. And I think what made the connection for me when hearing the gospel today was the overview that Cardinal Turkson was able to provide on just the wealth of the social encyclicals that we have in our church tradition. The other thing that was part of daily mass today that stuck out for me was in his homily when he mentioned that formation comes in two ways, and that's through study and prayer. And if I can be so bold, I'd like to add on action as well, because I think our formation, our study, our prayer needs to lead us to act, whether it's in our parishes, in our communities, but we're not meant to be just within the four walls of the church, because we are the body of Christ, and we are the church, and we live our lives outside of the four walls of a church. So for my ministry, that's really where I've just been able to kind of focus a lot on that work. Like Dr. Munson said in my introduction, I work at a parish as well as for a small national Catholic organization that supports those working in social ministry, which is never an easy task. I think most individuals, when they think of social justice, they have a lot of preconceived notions on what that is. And for me, what I really appreciated from the Cardinal's talk this afternoon was just that overview of the encyclicals and how they are just absolutely rooted and fundamental to our church teaching, which starts even beyond that with Scripture and the church fathers. Because when saying that you work in social justice ministries, people have very different reactions to that. And I've been called lots of fun names like a communist, or you're a liberal, or this, and it's like, no, just Catholic, just Catholic here. Because it provides a wonderful opportunity for dialogue and encounter on why people have preconceived notions about what the church's teachings are, and then what is our response as Catholics, especially in ministry. And the other thing that stuck out to me from your homily in particular is, and from the gospel, was, who is the prudent and faithful servant? And what does it mean to be faithful? Catholic social teaching is not an easy message to preach at all. And I know that. I've worked, like Dr. Munson said, worked in ministry in a variety of settings. And I have learned over the course of my short tenure that talking about Catholic social teaching is a delicate balance, and it requires honesty and vulnerability and really trying to give grace and understanding to the person that you're talking to. And I also learned a hard lesson that I will never do to any other priest. What I learned was there was some weekend early on when I thought there would have been a wonderful connection to a social issue, and I asked my pastor, why didn't you preach on this? And I will never ask that question ever again. But he gave me a very honest response. And he said, you know, I'm not going to, because he's like, I'm tired. He's like, and I know if I preach that message in the 4 parishes that he was responsible for, he's like, I'm probably going to get yelled at 4 different parishes. And he's like, I really don't feel like I have the energy to deal with that today. And for me, it was a stark reminder of, you all have a very difficult job, and you're going to have a very difficult job. So in my role as pastoral associate, which is a very catch-all term, I see myself as trying to be able to assist you in doing your ministry, because I am passionate about Catholic social teaching in particular, but also of our faith and how each person, regardless of whatever vocation they're in, whether it's single life, married life, religious life, they're called to live out their call of discipleship in a particular way. And you all, as soon-to-be priests or priests, will not have the energy to get to know every single person in your parish. It will just be impossible. And that's hard to do, and I would like to think that all of you are going into the priesthood because you want to be able to help lead others to God and help encounter God. And the best way to do that is one-on-one conversations and personal encounter. But when you're at a parish or a cluster of parishes with thousands of families, you need to rely on your staff and help form your staff so then they can go out and they can work on behalf of you, but ultimately on behalf of Christ. So it is a challenge, but it's one that I take very seriously because it is a responsibility and a duty, because I feel like I have been entrusted with a lot. I've been very fortunate to grow up in a very Catholic home, and really I appreciate the education that I've had, and how my parents really instilled in myself, but also my siblings, that the corporal works of mercy, the spiritual works of mercy are something that you shouldn't even have to think about, because it should just be part of who you are. And your faith, rooted in Christ, rooted in the Eucharist, should call you out of the 4 walls of the church to be able to live that on a regular basis. And it's really hard when you're talking about these challenging issues, but the compendium and the documents, the encyclicals, are really what ground us, because when you receive pushback or critiques on why are you talking about this issue, the church shouldn't be involved in politics. It's like, no, they should, because we care about every single individual person who has innate dignity because they're a child of God. And how they live, or how they might be struggling in their daily life, matters to the church. It matters to each of us, and it matters to the ministers who see them when they come to be fed at the altar on Sundays. And if you don't know your parishioners, you don't know what's going on in their lives, then it's going to be really hard to establish a relationship and bring them closer to Christ if you don't know that, a husband lost his job, or there was a recent diagnosis. You don't really know who's walking into the church on Sunday. But if you can entrust your staff and other ministers within the church to recognize that and step out, then we'll be able to respond in a truly effective way, and one where we'll then be able to live out the social teaching and our gospel call. But it is hard work, and I think the other little thing that I appreciate too is I rely on very heavily the encyclicals, and I can say that I'm the nerd that's read the compendium twice and would love to see a revised or an updated version, but that's just me. Maybe we'll get to that. But we can fall back on our history, we can fall back on our teaching, and use that as the crutch sometimes, especially when we get very challenging pushback. So I guess I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you to our panelists. Thank you for applauding, even despite the mic. So, Your Eminence, would you like to respond to either of our panelists?
I did already before we began. No, I think I appreciate all the comments, and probably starting with the last, the call for update already began.
Yay, thank you.
It's and in fact, before I left the dicastery now to the academy, it's like this. If you go to the site, you have official documents on site, and the compendium was not there before. So in 2014, we asked why the compendium was not there. And it's now part of the official document. That means canon law, catechism, and now the compendium. So they consider official doctrines of the church now. Then we needed to ask for permission from the Secretary of State to be able to, touch it. We 2 years permission to review it because it came out the second. We now have had Benedict, and we now have Francis. Both of them have come up with very serious teachings on the social doctrine. So we thought it was time to review it in the light of these two pontificates. And so we had, so that's already happening. The other thing, the call and all of that to do is, I think, you said it's difficult and all, and this is probably part of it. I mean, surveying the situation, the atmosphere situation in the country under which we work as a church now, we do have a lot of challenges. I mean, there's a family visiting us in Rome now, and then a child of the mother, now about 24, says she stopped attending Mass because of the sex abuse, right? And so this unfortunately has also become one of the obstacles. You step out to talk about social justice or justice in any context, and they take you to that. That you don't have. So we have a lot of it, but that does not prevent us from saying what we need to say or minister or be apostles of this. You probably all know Cardinal Mahoney from the West Coast. Mahoney used to be a big advocate of migrant workers in the Central Valley there, and because of his outspoken, support for these workers, he was used to receiving in their collection box pieces of black papers, right, saying we're now going to be giving money to you, okay, for what you say. So the challenges to proclaiming or teaching the church social teaching is not always easy. So for what you just observed, that doing church social teaching, they consider you a communist. It's not only here. I was in Hong Kong to present the church social teaching, and then unfortunately, I came across that. So why are you here talking about church? This is communism or whatever type of thing. And then again, so it's not a unique experience in the United States. It is everywhere, and every now and then it's until you begin to ask people, well, what did James mean when he said faith without works is dead? Identify to me those works. And then timidly they come around that and finally come to recognize that you have to do something concrete in society. But this is the thing I will need help with. I recognize that we come to all of this from Rome, so from outside the United States, and we know that certain concepts are not welcome here. Common good is for a lot of people communism. Okay, and so the word social itself. And we very much appreciate about how to address those issues from your own concrete experience and stuff like that. But even concepts of today, Aristotle already starts speaking about citizens in the society have the obligation to contribute to the common good of the society. Way not Aristotle. So it's not. It should not be any problem, but just that probably the notion of common good and communism, whatever it is, but those challenges are there. So as we go around talking about the church's social teaching, we come across some of these challenges, and invariably your own ministry is brought to the exposure of all of this. So we probably need to find a way of presenting or teaching the church's social teaching in a way that is acceptable. The principles are there. It's always referred to by people as the church's well-kept secret. And it's like people outside the church, when they come to discover the compendium, they say, how come you've kept this to yourself all this time? So it's a rich principles for application in society and all of that, but it still has challenges. Is there people who still have a little bit of difficulty with it. So it's to thank you for the observations, and I think the best part has to come from you. So what do you all say? Thanks.
All right, so we will begin with 40 different questions. See how far we go. The first question we have for the panel is, how does the church dialogue with and/or critique social organizations who may promote certain just causes, but also promote unjust causes? That makes sense. Ms. Orr, do you want to start?
I'm happy to.
All right.
I was gonna, unless Cardinal.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, I think in particular, again, a very humbleness and humility needs to go along with dialogue. I think that each individual needs to be able to willingly and actually listen to other people and other organizations, because I wrote it down, and I have to see if I can actually find it. But in Fratelli Tutti, it was paragraph number 203. It was where Pope Francis said, authentic social dialogue involves the ability to respect the other's point of view and to admit that it may include legitimate convictions and concerns. And I think that that's the challenge to each of us, is that we need to be able to use our good listening ears, if I would talk to my 7-year-old, use our good listening ears and really try and understand who the other individual is that might be part of an organization that has some very different viewpoints, and try and find, is there some commonality in what they're trying to accomplish on a particular issue, maybe not the entirety of what the organization does, but say, is there some sort of common ground that we can identify together to work on this one thing together? And I think that, here at Sacred Heart, having the Lux Center, it's a wonderful opportunity to, again, look at dialoguing with other faith traditions in an ecumenical manner. It doesn't have to necessarily be a completely different organization that's secular, has no strong connection to a Catholic Church at all. But I think on any one of these social issues, what's truly important to remember is that they are beyond what any one parish can accomplish themselves. When you're trying to tackle big issues like migration or racial justice or anything like that, you need to look at it from a community-wide effort and see where is the common ground that we can identify and work on together. That takes a lot of time, and it doesn't happen overnight. I am one of those people that I like to have a plan, I put it in place, and we just move forward with it. And it's just, again, through a little bit of experience and just stumbling along the way, that's not the case. Relationships take time to build, and it can't happen overnight. And I think the other challenge with that too is that having realistic timelines might not include you. Given the fact of where you're going to be potentially assigned at a parish, you might only be there for 3 years. And sometimes it takes 3 years just to lay the groundwork on how to assess something. So I think you also have to be okay with the fact that, I can plant the seed here like the mustard seed, and it's not my job to see exactly how it plays out in the long run. I just need to do my part along with that. But to have an honest dialogue where you're actually listening to another person to see what is the common ground that can be identified and maybe go from there, that would be my response.
Mm-hmm.
I have nothing to add. I thought that was a beautiful response. So.
The small bit left was the part about the just causes and unjust causes. That the tail end of the question
Yes.
has something like just causes and unjust causes, if I heard right.
Yes. So, how do you dialogue with organizations who promote both just causes and unjust causes?
Okay, so that's what caught my attention. I wonder, would have been great if the questioner has some examples to what are the just causes and unjust causes. It's difficult for me to address that, not knowing. Yeah.
So we only gave them.
Yeah,
But another question that came up, so we could go there, is what about for organizations that both promote part of the Catholic Church's social teaching, but maybe on social issues, but not moral issues? For instance, on marriage or abortion. How does one dialogue with those kind of entities?
Yeah, social issues, but not moral issues. Those are the separations that I would probably, question. What things will be social and purely social and not moral? The thing about the integrality of a whole lot of things would invite us to probably put them all together. A situation or an issue that is simply social and not moral, for me, does not exist. If anything that touches the human person and involves in one or the other, has these implications. So, in any case, we can recognize the possibility of rather a phenomenon which we've been dealing with, and that is the phenomenon of a divided life. Divided life we do have, that's when a believer keeps his faith outside the door, when he's either going to business or doing something else. It's the inability to bring your faith into what you do. So we've done courses and stuff encouraging business people to bring their faith into their business and not function as a CEO or business or whatever, and then at some other moment, a believer. But have the consistency of being, you're a businessman as a believer. You are this as a person of faith, and not. So that separation is something that we witness in several cases, and for which we basically trying to encourage people to overcome the divided life kind of syndrome. When we did a small booklet the other day about the vocation of the business leader, the objective was precisely that, to encourage business people to have the courage to bring their faith into their business, not to operate as CEO without their faith and then come out at some other time to practice their faith, but have them all together for this coherent type of thing, which initially may not be easy, but the stuff that we wish has to happen. The witness we bear should be witness that is coherent in all situations, not when we're in church and not when we're outside church. So that would be my the way I would take that question.
Thank you. We'll move on to the next question. We often speak about the priest's need to get out of the sacristy. Yet I cannot help but wonder if the priest's greatest resources are those which he has in the sacristy, that is, the sacraments. Could you provide some advice on between the priest's influence and responsibility regarding temporal affairs and his stewardship of the heavenly mysteries.
Junior.
Who wants to go?
So to be fair, it says for Cardinal Turkson.
No, I recognize to be fine. About priests not limiting their ministry to the sacristy is a fair observation, but as the thing says, it's about not limiting your ministry to the sacristy. It is not saying that there's something wrong or there's something wrong with the sacristy part of your ministry. The sacramental dimension of our ministries, those are there. But effectively, to have the energy to go out into society. So when we get involved, we do that with a clear sense of an identity. A clear sense of an identity rooted also in a clear experience of grace. And that identity and grace we fashion and we seek for in the moment of prayer and the sacraments. So tension between the two. There is time to live the sacraments, but it is to fashion the identity, to fashion the grace experience, to be able to go out to. Because the thing is this, when we decide to do anything, we're not going to present ourselves. We're going to evangelize, we're going to present Jesus. You don't have. When you go to society and you don't have something that you're going to give, then you better not do it. And so you need to go with something that you must have cultivated within yourself. And that is the moment of sacrament, the moment of prayer, the moment of everything that is there. So that is a necessary component, a necessary part of what one steps out into society to do. Otherwise, the risk will become what I mentioned briefly. Like in Latin America, people thinking that the solution is to be political, to leave the sacristy and just go into politics. When that is the case, then we've lost something. So there is time for the sacristy and time for whatever. Why did Jesus, in the time of the Romans, not just mount a coup d'etat and drive the Romans out? But still, in the light of his own mission and ministry, he still tolerated and bore with the Romans, so that tolerance led him to the cross. So the distinction between pastoral and political is still a very valid presentation, and we're able to do that to the extent that we develop a very intimate sense of spirituality and a relation with Christ, which is what we go out also to present.
Can I add?
Please, Ms. Orr.
The other thing that I think that came to mind for me is just the fact that it's not only, I think, priests that struggle with this and trying to balance their faith life as well as getting to know their parishioners, but it's also your staff, the permanent deacons, and the lay leaders as well. I think each of us is called to be able to be nourished at the Eucharistic table, but then to go out and to be able to live our faith throughout the week. And that's where everybody kind of struggles with that. And I think being able to be honest about that and how we're continually being fed spiritually and how that's supposed to draw us out into to live within society and tackle some of these larger issues is extremely important. And I had one other very profound thought that just escaped me, so let that go.
Dr. Stroud?
So the only thing I'd add is, so Father Dehon brings this up in the Social Catechism, specifically in the section on the duty to priests. And he references that this go out of the sacristies, get out of the churches, this is an injunction he gets from Leo XIII, that priests need to get out of the church. Now, what he's after, at least the one section I can remember, is that he ultimately wants you to get to know serving, to know you're living in, to know the reality of the world that you don't see if you don't go outside the church and actually know where people live and work and breathe and do all the activities of human life that give shape to what they bring to the church and bring to the confessional. And so in some ways, he's really pushing people to say, pushing priests, you have to know your flock. You have to know who they are. You have to know their sufferings, their failings, their ills, sins. You have to know them. And if you confine yourself simply to the sacraments, you're limiting yourself in a certain way to what you can really do, because it limits how you can preach, right? How do you know how to preach to the things that are going on in the community if you don't know what's going on and if you're not listening to them? And so I think part of it's that the insistence as he talks about it, and I can actually show you, if you want to see, I've actually copied it into a document, this kind of insistence of you have to know your people and you have to know the conditions they're in. So that plays into this, I think, thinking about being fed and knowing where people are, so you can be the conduit of God's grace to wherever they need that in their lives.
Can I add small?
Yes, Your Eminence.
So just to share an experience over here illustrates this at this point. Some of you may know of the Renewal Ministries. Okay, Ralph Martin, Peter Herbeck, and co. I used to do a lot of work with them, and in 2000 I was invited to Ann Arbor because a minister of a black church had put himself to a study of the church fathers and had come to the decision that the Catholic Church is the place to be. He announced this in his church, and the community broke up, and some wanted also felt betrayed. So we engaged with the minister, Pastor Jones. Then he says, there's one thing I don't understand about the Catholic Church. When your young men get ordained, before they know the address of a single whatever, you call him father. You call a person father when he knows practically nothing about the faithful he's serving. So he said, we start with pastor. That engages, have you, whatever. And when you know about your faithful, then you can assume the title father. So it appeared to be a very banal observation, but that was about you're a father to people you know nothing about, And so that was the point he was trying to make. So we start at a pastor, one engages whatever, and then later on, when you know about them, how they live, how whatever, then you can consider yourself as fatherly to them, but not before that happens.
Thank you very much. So go on to the third question here. Your Eminence, you spoke of the threefold nature of the Church's response: spiritual, pastoral, political. What about economics? So we have a question here.
Okay.
Would a 21st century social catechism view a free market economy as the best economics model for the flourishing of the human person?
Whoever put that question may probably have read Centesimus Annus. because this is a big innovation of John Paul II in Centesimus Annus. The first pope that presented market economy in very positive terms. So yes, it's something that we have to deal with. So the thing that will be interesting to look at is you take Centesimus Annus with this positive view of market economy and its big contribution to people's life and all of that, on account of which Pope Francis would therefore send a message to Davos and acknowledge how market economy and stuff like that has lifted a lot of people out of poverty. But we'll still come back to criticize the same free for it creates and the indifference that sometimes it generates towards the poor and the needy in society. So the two are, so we have the two observations. Yes, market economy can do some good, but at the same time, it can also have an experience which makes one disregard the poor, the needy ones, and just widens the gap of inequality. So it's something to be evangelized, we would say. In our terms, we'll talk about the need to evangelize experiences like this. And this is what some of you may know about this. Just in the last month, Pope Francis had guided in Assisi 3,000 young people under a program called the Economy of Pope Francis. Anybody knows about that? Okay, so the Economy of Pope Francis is an initiative for Pope Francis to get young people to rethink, to think about a new model, economy that promotes well-being of human life without the inequalities and the imbalances that we have. So, and a free market economy, that's good, but it's still not a perfect form of not creating the inequalities and the poor and whatever, and it would be great if it will be fine-tuned in a way that it promotes real economy and real economy in such a way that doesn't also create any disparities and inequalities among us.
Dr. Stroud, Ms. Orr?
Do you want to? I can. The word that stuck out to me in that question was flourishing. And the question I'd pose back is, especially if you're thinking about your own community, is, are all of my parishioners flourishing right now? Are they flourishing in their families? Are they flourishing economically just as like their own family unit? And I would wager that many are and probably many aren't. And I think that's where the challenge is to each of us, is to take a look at the systems that are in place within our own country and around the world and to say, is every person, is every family flourishing right now? And I think we can all say the answer is no. There are people that are struggling, very much so, especially in different parts of the world, but even here in the United States. And I think that poverty, depending on where you look at it, just around the world, it looks different, but there is poverty here. There's poverty, and I work in a very wonderful parish that within the Archdiocese of Milwaukee that is known to be more affluent than others. And I know the privilege that comes with that, but that's also not to say that there is still homelessness in Ozaukee County, which is one of the more prominent counties within the Archdiocese. So I see like my role as a minister then is to be able to acknowledge, to say, poverty does exist in my own backyard. I know it exists, so then what is my responsibility and how to respond to that? And working with the organizations who may not be Catholic, like some of the other food pantries, on how to ensure that people's basic needs are cared for. While at the same time acknowledging that there are systems in place that also might need to be transformed a little bit. And I'm looking at one of my teachers here in the Corwin program. We were just chatting about this, and you all know this, but charity and justice go hand in hand, and no institution, no system is perfect. And that's why I truly believe as a Catholic that we need to be able to engage in the legislative process to be able to transform those structures to ensure that more people are flourishing than those who aren't.
So the only thing I'd add, going back to really Centesimus Annus, you see this beautiful, and it's funny because I think some people miss it, slightly Marxist-inspired critique that John Paul II offers about free market economy, right? He talks about the experience of alienation that that workers and that human beings experience in today's world because of the way in which the notion of work has radically changed in the last 240 years, by far exceeding anything that ever happened in antiquity and up to the modern period. I mean, just think for a minute that most people lived and worked with very tangible kinds of things. They farmed, they built things, they made chairs, tables, they raised cattle, they raised all these kinds of things. And then to say that you're now going to make, as one of my colleagues always likes talking about at another institution, they're making widgets now. These little widgets, they make 5 million widgets a month, that they never actually see a final product that they actually get to hold and see. Or imagine people who sit at a computer and create code that exists in a computer in a box that you never see, that has no tangible reality to it. And we are tactile human beings. We have a yearning for the physical, and our economy has reshaped our physical experience of the world around us. And John Paul II is right to critique this alienation that exists, and he notes this very quickly first in the encyclical on work, where he's we need to think about a spirituality of work. We need to develop, and nobody's done it. I haven't seen a really good account of a spirituality of work for lay people. And then to come with this alienation critique, which is, let's face it, it's like textbook Marxist critique from the 1800s. And it's like, this is really powerful, persuasive argument that we can accept the free market economy, but we have to challenge it. And I think that's what Benedict and Francis have done in asking, is the economy, is the practice of the economic workplace putting the person, the human person, first? Is the human person being put first? And if it's not, then we need to challenge that, because that hurts the worker, that hurts the buyer, the consumer, and that creates all sorts of dysfunction and alienation that continues to pervade all of society, and that we see in all the different manifestations. And so I think there's something to this idea. We can accept it because it's what's working, it's what's good, but we also have to challenge it, right, of the things that it does, and again, how to put a kind of priority of ultimately the human person front and center, right? And who is that human person? That's the face of Christ, right? The migrant worker who's picking fruit in the trees in California, or the migrant worker coming from Mexico into Texas to work. They're picking the fruit yet you'll never see their face. They're the faceless human being that you'll never see, but who actually does the work because they need the money to pay for their family back home, who has no money, who has no job. And it's like this dysfunctional, broken economy where we don't even see the people who make the things we make. They're like fictitious things in a factory in China or Taiwan or wherever it may be, or Mexico. And so it's like how to put the human person center. And I love how, especially Benedict and Francis have accented that enormously.
One thing, can I add one thing on that? Sorry.
Please.
The thing that you had mentioned that jumped out at me was a spirituality of work. And one of the themes of Catholic social teaching is the right to work and the dignity of the worker. And Catholic social teaching in general is one of the church's best kept secrets, which I also really hate, because then it's like, well, I'm not doing a good job in my ministry if that's still the case. But that theme in particular is one of the least known. And for me, it's really important because every person works at some point in their life. Everybody can remember what their first job is. And to be able to have a spirituality of work, it's being able to look at that we are co-creators in God's vineyard in whatever small capacity that is, whether it's working in ministry, whether it's working in a field. All of us are participating in some way. And one example that I have just through my work with the Catholic Labor Network is that COVID really did upend and shine a light on the dignity of work and the rights of workers, especially for those who are working primarily in the food service industry and hospitality, which are primarily individuals of black and brown skin colors. And when they lost their jobs at the beginning of the pandemic, one of my colleagues, she works for a union out in California, because the hotel industry there wanted to hire a completely new workforce. They did not want to rehire their workers at the rate in which that they had moved up. Some of them had worked there for 20 plus years and were earning a decent salary. So COVID provided them an opportunity to completely try and hire a new labor force at a fraction of the price. If it wasn't for the efforts of the union there to be able to push and advocate for the fact that the existing workers who had dedicated a lot of their lives at that hotel, they wanted to be able to ensure that they get those jobs back, and thankfully they did. And that was a lot of the work of the union, but also Catholic faithful too, that were engaged in that process and recognizing that these individuals had a right to work, and we needed to honor them and not just discard them, which I think Pope Francis highlights a lot with when he says there's a culture of indifference or a throwaway culture. Literally, in a very practical way, this hotel and this employer was trying to throw away and discard its workers. And if it was the individuals of the union and other lay faithful that advocated to ensure that they got their jobs back, and they did.
Thank you. So here we have a bit more of a philosophical question. It's not addressed to Cardinal Turkson, but I think it is. Is there any distinction between ecology and the common good? And if so, what is the reason for the change in terminology?
I will not see a distinction between ecology and the common good, because ecology can be part of common good, and common good can also serve ecology. So a difference between them, I will not see. And common good is what? Some of you here may know about the story of the Boston Common. Anybody? There is a story here, so-called story about the Boston Common. Boston Common story is about, it's located in Boston, that there was a piece of property which was kept, for all citizens to take care of their cattle. And each one was supposed to bring one animal to graze, in this one. So that was a common for everybody to, use for the cattle. Till at one point, some began to bring more than one. Okay, and bringing more than one, the property couldn't then serve everybody. Some begin to lose out. Okay, so an arrangement that was meant to accommodate everybody, so it became a common good. That bit of land was served the common good of all in the community, until somebody began to get more than his share, and then the common system collapsed. So in that sense, common good basically then would be this: if we start with the affirmation of the dignity of every person, then what is necessary for every person to realize his dignity is the common good. And that for each one of us to realize the common good serves then to promote the realization of dignity for each one of us. And when a suitable environment is part of this, then it serves the common good. Then it cannot be anything opposed to the common good, but something that contributes to and serves the common good. So in that sense, I will not see a tension between the two, but it's the two elements interpenetrate and serve each other.
Dr. Stroud, Ms. Orr? Nothing?
I mean, I can always chime in. Don't mind me. I'm not shy. For me, I do think I am not a scientist by any means, but what I do know understanding about ecology is that there's a delicate balance that needs to happen within that for each of the various individuals or systems to thrive. And when it's out of balance, then everything's out of sync and kind of chaos ensues. So I truly, to Cardinal Turkson's point, is that the environment in which we all live needs to be able to be balanced so that we can support the common good and support the individual and the dignity of each person. And when it gets out of balance, that's where we can see friction, tension, and just conflict, which I mean is kind of prevalent. So that'd be my
Okay, so probably give you some more labels. These days, it's so very common and usual to hear languages from the United Nations as World Heritage X, World Heritage that, World Heritage that. Those are ways of expressing that certain things are for the common good. When the UN refers to anything as a World Heritage, then it's just something that is meant to serve, okay, the world community, as it were. So it needs to be preserved for the world community. And in that sense, a healthy ocean is a common good. A sustainable supply of water is a common good. Anything that is meant to support the livelihood of all of us together is a common good. And when such elements are ecological or belongs to nature and all of that, they do that. Now, several whatever you can give a lot of examples. You fly over the Alps. Last year, flying over the Alps in May, you saw snow. This year, flying over the Alps in May, you see no snow. Okay, and then the report comes about the communities living out there have no water. So again, the presence of snow affects the life of a community downstream. And so the connection between ecology or ecological phenomenon or feature and the common good of whatever is very common and easy to demonstrate.
Thank you. Another question here. So marriage and the family are foundational for our social life together. What role does the church's promotion of marriage play in, or would play, in a new social catechism, especially given contemporary movements against the idea of traditional marriage?
And that goes to the married people, right?
Go first, you want me to?
It does not say Cardinal Turkson. So
Do you want to go first, or you want me to?
Ladies first.
I'm probably sick of hearing me talk at this point. Well, yes, as the lay married woman here with 3 kids, I do think it plays a critical role in a social catechism, because we know that the family is foundation of society. It is the domestic church. It's where we learn our first lessons. But at the same time, too, I think I'd like to take it just a slightly different way, in the sense that I think the church, too, also needs to recognize how it's supporting marriages and families. As a lay woman working in the church, knowing that the vast majority of meetings and everything that happens in parish life is in the evenings as well as on the weekends, it's really hard to balance as a lay person working in a parish, respecting in my own family's time. And that's something that I know over the course of just my own ministry and being very honest with my pastor. I'm just saying that there has to be a healthy balance of when you expect me to be in the office during regular business hours, but then to be back at the parish in the evenings for pastoral council and finance council, but then also be present on the weekends. Especially, I mean, my husband is not Catholic, so I take it upon myself, again, a very big responsibility to make sure that my 3 children are raised Catholic and bringing them to Mass, while also being present to parishioners. And now, if you come from, you all come from families and you have small kids, nieces and nephews, bringing a 7, 5, and 10-month-old to Mass is not fun. It really is. It is a challenge, but it's one that I want to do, and some weeks are easier than others. But there does have to be a balance with that, and even how the church honors marriage and family life. Also, just the fact that I do think the church is a wonderful advocate for marriage and family life, especially in the sense when it's looking at some of the pieces of legislation that are currently in the Senate, like the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. It's something that the church has advocated for over the last 1.5 years and continues to promote, which needs to pass, and we need to encourage people to do that, because I just came off of maternity leave with my own, and I know how important that time is with my child, and I loved every minute of it. But I'd also like to challenge the church to look at its own practices, because the 12 weeks I took was unpaid. And I was only able to do that by virtue of the fact because my husband has a good job, and I was able to take that time. However, I also know my own privilege with that, because I am married. I have a spouse that is engaged in the kids' lives, and he's going to be the one picking up the kids in an 1.5 hours from school. Not every person has that. And I think there was a recent report done by Femme Catholic that looked at the diocesan paid leaves that's offered within the United States. And I mean, I encourage you to look it up, because it's dismal. There's a fraction of dioceses that offer paid leave for their own workers. So I think that there is time and energy that needs to go in to promote marriage and family within the larger culture, because yes, there are current threats that are always in the news, and you know which ones I'm talking about. But I'd also encourage us to take a look inward to see how the church itself is supporting marriages and families.
Dr. Stroud?
Yeah, so how to keep it simple. I can't remember the exact quotation from John Paul II on this point, but this is echoed in the tradition. It's nothing radically new, where he talks about that marriages, the way marriage and family goes, the way society goes, right? The health of the marriage and family life determines how things happen and function in society and political discourse and all of human life. And part of it simply is just that all of that formative experience that happens for a human being should be, ideally, right, the family with a mother and father and siblings and whatever, however the circumstances are, or grandparents or aunts and uncles, cousins, nephews, nieces, all those things that happen that shape the interactions of people, because that's where you learn to live, that's where you learn to love, that's where you learn to think. And if that falls apart, if that disintegrates, if that dissipates and is destructive, I mean, we see that every day, right? We see the effects of that every day in the news and here in Milwaukee, or whether you're watching certain trials that are happening or other things that are going on in the world. It's that you see the dysfunction that happens, and you can all locate it. It's not simply the family's fault or whatever happens there, the failures of support and the economy and all the different facets that play into that, but it's the recognition of how central that is, how important that is. Now, that doesn't mean that if a person comes from a broken home, that you can't succeed, you can't grow in holiness, you can't do things in the world. People do that all the time. That's the beauty of ingenuity, of resilience of children, and the ability to grow out of horrible circumstances, that they go on to do and be better human beings that they don't have. But not having those role models, right, already gives people challenges that are going to be difficult to overcome. And this has repercussions for schools, public schools, private schools, parishes, parish life. And this shapes is everywhere. And so the marriage and family has to be like one of the central planks. And I think all of the popes of recent memory going, you could go back to every single one of them, actually, if you want to go back to Leo the 13th as like a one starting point. Always focus on the effects of how does this affect the family? How does this affect parents? How does it affect children? And it's the kind of recognition of how central this is to all of these social questions that are coming up.
Yeah, so at the end of the day, this is a typical instance of what we mean by integral human ecology. Integral human ecology, a big crucial subject of that is the family. We're not talking about livelihood and all of that, but the question of conscience, the question of legislations that are supportive or non-supportive of family life, the question of state arrangement that promote family life or not. So easy, very easy. The church will refer to the family as a cell, okay, the cell of a society, on account of which what the observation that if this is not healthy, the whole of society is not healthy. But that makes the family a crucial point of reference for what we call integral human ecology. Everything that is necessary to make a family life flourish, that is the beginning of life, and that's the beginning of anything that holds a family a society together.
Thank you. We have a pastoral question. What is the relationship between the Church's commitment to integral human ecology or social development and the Church's most fundamental task, the salvation of souls?
They're not opposed again. Again, I don't think they are opposed. The first slide that I showed at the beginning of this, that commitment to the well-being, the flourishing of the human person, has been a concern of the Church from the beginning. That kind of concern of the Church from beginning is very crucial. So the well-being, it's whether that sense of well-being is to be limited to just flourishing on earth and not anything beyond that is not the case. So I would not oppose. See, plus everything of human life is like related with a bit of the Our Father prayer. Okay, may your kingdom come on earth as it is in heaven. And that just provides for everything that we do on earth, having a point of reference which is in heaven. So everything happens as it is in heaven means that the rationale, the justification, the whatever of everything out here is not with reference to anything here, but with reference to as it were heaven. And that kind of disposes us to kind of widen, our perspective on all of these issues in such a way that possible tensions and possible, oppositions or disagreements are all taken care of. But integral ecology is simply saying that the human being is essentially a relational being. It's a relationship not only with God, but also with one another, with the environment on which it lives, and all of that. And so integral ecology is related to the sense of the human person in its relationality, to recognize all the other things with which it's in relationship with. And the wholesomeness of all of this relationship is what ultimately contributes to the wholesomeness of an integral ecology. And when that is the case, this wholesomeness is not just to be limited to a GDP, economic growth, or figure out here, but it's a wholesomeness of a life on earth, which disposes one also for the life hereafter. And in that sense, I don't see a tension between integral ecology and human flourishing, whether in heaven or whatever. They related, they pass on from this to there, and what happens there inspires how this is also lived or happens here.
Dr. Strauss?
So just a quick chime in here. So this is connected to the common good topic, but you could also bring this in with the human development aspect and the integral aspect of this, the human ecology, is this idea that, and part of it's simply, I think, because of our context here in the United States, where we have this idea of this kind of separation of church and state that exists, or however you want to think that, how that works or exists as an idea or in principle, or it's in its instantiation here in this country. The recognition that when you go read about the common good in Pope St. John the 23rd, he's very clear that the common good isn't solely about bodily goods. It also has a spiritual dimension to it, right? He calls them the goods of the soul in the text that I'm thinking of. I can't remember which encyclical it's in. It's one of the two encyclicals, where it's like, it's the goods of the soul. And this is the challenging part, right? That the state, right, in the Catholic teaching has a role in some way in ensuring that people have access to these goods of the soul. And that's the challenge to kind of American notions of democracy and separation of church and state. And that's kind of the uncomfortable tension that you see with all the flurry of discussions about politics and state and church and those relations, because it wants to keep some notions of the common good strictly at a material level, when the church has been teaching, especially since Pope St. John the 23rd articulated it in his encyclicals, that the common good isn't solely material, it does have a spiritual dimension. And that really ups the ante when we think about human development. It's not solely about, again, the material things, but it also involves the spiritual. So it's the whole person that has to be looked at. And the whole person, every person, both their material and spiritual goods.
Yeah, one of the images that was really useful for me growing up, because my dad was in the Army for over 20 years, but Pope Francis's use of the church needs to be a field hospital. I do think that it's a helpful one, because when you think of a war zone and military and what triage looks like, it's trying to identify where the greatest need is at that particular moment. It's not to say that other needs are not important, they're just not as pressing at that particular moment. But you can't ignore all of it. You have to be able to identify what's the most pressing need right now, and then continue on in that relationship. Because if a person's material and bodily needs aren't being met, it's really hard then to address salvation of souls and encouraging prayer when a person is hungry or they're in an abusive marriage and they go home and they're not in a safe living environment. So I think it's our role then to be able to identify what is the most pressing need, to enter into another person's vulnerability and their chaos, which is going to be really messy and hard, but to be able to then help and walk with that person so that their material and bodily needs are being met, but also then their spiritual ones, because we are an entire person in its totality. But that's our role as ministers, and especially for you all soon to be priests and pastors, is to be able to know your parishioners, know your flock, and to be able to see where are the most pressing needs right now, and then to continue to walk with and accompany them so that all needs are fully met.
Thank you. So we are getting close to 2:30. Since we have not taken a break, my plan, since apparently I'm in charge, is, I know, scary thought, right? Is to do a couple more questions and then conclude a little bit early. So we have here an interesting question about what would be the relationship between this language of an integral human ecology and the Catholic social principle of subsidiarity.
Again, they're interdependent and they flow from one another. So, if again, integral human ecology is a realization of people's dignity in its highest form, then the principle of subsidiarity would mean that in a situation where one is not able to do this, the society, so subsidiarity is presented in several ways. Subsidiarity technically would say a bigger instance or bigger office does not need to do what a smaller instance is able to do on its own, so to respect that. At the same time, when we focus on the word subsidium, which is subsidiarity, then it also means it's an enabling factor. When in a society, everybody has to contribute to the well-being of a society, and one is not able to, receiving help to be able to do what one has to do in a society becomes subsidiary. So promoting, enabling somebody to be able to contribute to the well-being of a society, the building up a common good, is a subsidiary. So in that sense, if we identify integral human ecology as an expression or realization of a person's dignity, then it's all elements of society have the obligation to contribute to this. If an element, if in doing that, become their solidary, so become their solidarity. And when one, for any reason, is not able to fulfill its role, to play the solidarity role towards this, then receiving help to be able to do what has to do as a citizen of a community is to act in subsidiarity towards that person. It means you're just enabling a person to play its role within a society that is supposed to play. For one or the other reason, he may not have been able, but enabling the person to so contribute to the well-being of a society, which is what every member of society has to do, becomes a thing of subsidiarity. So in that sense, it's a way that one enables one's own self and other people in the society to realize their integral human development or their common good.
Dr. Stroud, Ms. Orr? All right. It's best not to contradict the Cardinal, for sure. What would be the relationship between integral human ecology or social ecology and this principle of synodality that Pope Francis has presented for the Church?
No, so again, yeah, it's interesting. Again, I will not even have thought that a possible opposition between the two terms, but the question formulates it that way. So integral ecology, right? You said. So integral ecology, I think it's basically saying that Pope Benedict will put it this way: the book of nature is one. Okay, so it's not separable this from that, which just means that human beings depend on nature, just as nature depends on human beings and society and all of that. So there are no independent variables in what contributes to the integral development of the well-being of an individual. So integral ecology Now it's natural, it is human, it is social, it is peace. And as I mentioned, Francis now is even beginning to talk about the ecology also of economics. Okay, so it's just a set of conditions that is necessary to make any of these elements function properly as they're supposed to, to do. And so when that is the case, synodality is something that, a talk that is probably new in the church, but it's been there with the Orthodox churches since Adam. Okay, and some of the Protestant churches in their thing about their conferences also exercise a synodality. It's all of a sudden the occasion to recognize that the church is not just the clergy, or the church is a community of the charismatic, of the hierarchical group, but also the sacramental group. The charismatic component of it and the non-charismatic component of it. What do I mean by charismatic component and all of that? Priesthood as an ordination is an act of grace. So as an act of grace, you can call it a charismatic expression, whatever. So there are some in the church who, by reason of this charism, are placed on another level in this one. There are others non-charismatic who are on another level. Synodality invites us all to recognize, despite all of these different that can come, that we are a family of God, all of us together. And so it is good, therefore, to come together in that sense to think about our common destiny, as it were, on our path towards that destiny. So synhodos, all the roads, a charismatic road, hierarchical road, lay road, every road, but it's a synhodos. And then the hodos being the way, all of them coming together or confluence to achieve it invites us to recognize all of a sudden, or at the same time, the diversity that makes up this entity that we call the church. The different roles that are exercised to make the church come together. So in itself, then, it should not be anything that should be opposed to integral ecology. It's rather an invitation to listen to something that John Henry Newman has said long ago: consult the faithful. Every now and then, it is useful to consult the faithful. The church is not just hierarchical and clergy, but the church is the clergy and the faithful, the charismatic and non-charismatic, and all of these components. So the realization of this is good to have. But when you talk about a good component that comes up strongly, that feels itself for the first time being listened to, is the youth. Okay, the youthful group is a group that also feels that the synodal experience enables them to express themselves more freely also in the church. But the bottom line is to recognize the nature of the church in its diverse charismatic experiences, hierarchical experience, as essentially one unit, one family, that every now and then needs to listen to all its members.
Thank you. Dr. Stroud, Ms. Orr, anything?
I've got some thoughts on this one. I mean, you can picture your own family, and I don't know how all yours are, but mine has pretty lively conversations, especially with extended family around holidays are coming up. And really being able to listen to one another can be a challenge. And I don't know about you, but I get asked pretty frequently by friends who have fallen away from the church, or family who has, like, one, how can you still go? And two, how can you still work for the church? And I think that is where it's in this spirit of synodality, it's being able to listen to the hurts of individuals who still want to have a relationship with Christ, but are having struggles and challenges with the church as an institution. And I think that's where, in my role as a minister, I mean, I'm the church lady in the family now, and it's just, you get asked those questions all the time. And I think it's being able to take that on and being willing to dialogue and willing to listen to the hurt of some who are still holding on by a thread and wanting to engage with the church. But I think that's why just the more recent emphasis by Pope Francis on synodality has been, for me, a breath of fresh air, because it gives people the opportunity to feel like they have a space to voice their thoughts and to voice their opinions where they thought probably they didn't have that space before. And you can open up a can of worms, and it can be really challenging. So I'd encourage you to, if it's not a family event, set a time limit on those, because it can open up just a world of hurt for individuals. But to take that on is really important for those working in the church, because especially when you look at the definition of a parish, you're not just responsible for the people who are registered in the parish. You're responsible for the entire parochial boundaries. And those are people who are going to church, and they're people who aren't going to church.
If I may tag on to this, just your last bit. So I think something that might be very interesting and useful for you to hear. The German church had been going on this synodal path way before Pope Francis announced a synod. And so the church in Germany has been very much working with this synodal experience. And the idea, a few of the outcomes were brought to the Vatican, and they just received the order or whatever to just now proceed. The Diocese of Trier, for example, had a synodal whatever type of thing, and the result came. And actually, before the result came to Rome, a group within the church had organized itself as a protest against whatever. So, what is happening? One of the things happened, instance, which was shared by one cardinal from one, is that all of a sudden, there are sections of the church in Germany which are saying that, okay, we look at ourselves as a church in Germany. Our people have made, this experience in society, development, whatever, thinking, culture, at different levels and whatever. And from our experience of culture, development, and all of that, we cannot allow that to be brought to Rome in a synod with third world countries and whatever, who have not made the same experience, to block things from their. See where the danger is? So it's no more a universal church activity, but elements within the church haven't made different experiences. Therefore, it becomes difficult for them to have. We've made this experience. We have that, and we have that. We have that. Other sections in the communities, could be India, could be Africa, could be whatever, have not quite made that experience. So if you ask us all to express our opinion, then these others may say, no, we don't agree with this, we don't agree with this. So what they maybe what the others from their experience recognize that is a thing to do. But concern the church as a universal entity and all of that, then you have, as it were, some group traveling at a low velocity, holding back or whatever, or stopping those who are traveling at a higher level. So in that sense, the synodal experience is something that should enable us to reconfess our faith in the universal church, identify what makes us all universal, and that is not based on simple, theological, enlightenment up to a certain age, but the real basic faith and its expression. So this would actually, I suppose, when ultimately we get together for this synodal experience, this will probably be the biggest challenge. How we going to make the church function as a universal entity, okay, regardless of different stages of growth and development, the different paths. That is likely to be the challenge.
All right, so we have one last question here, and I'm going to preface it with saying there are many questions we did not get to. I personally, going through these questions, am very impressed with the thought that was put into them. So you have my personal apology if we did not get to your question. You can hold it against me if you wish, but this person decided to underline certain things in their question. So I feel almost obliged to ask it. Why should the church adopt the language of social ecology or human ecology in place of social justice? Does this not risk cheapening the church's social teaching by deprioritizing a virtue, namely justice, that is so central not just only to the church's scriptures and tradition, but also the entire history of Western philosophy?
Really light one to end on.
So, let me start. No, so first I'll say to whoever wrote the question, he's not the first one to have that concern or even to address that. The latest person who addressed that was Cardinal Zhang of Hong Kong, who wrote a letter asking that, after the Second Vatican Council, Paul VI created a Council for Justice and Peace in the Vatican. And the creation of the Council for Justice and Peace in the Vatican generated in all the dioceses the creation of commissions of justice and peace. So in several dioceses, the commissions for justice and peace exist in relation, so liaising with the Vatican Council for Justice and Peace as a central body of reference. So then became, as Paul VI himself said, justice became the synthetic expression of all the social issues that can come up. Now, when we talk about integrated equity, it's not replacing that. So that just means, so what is justice? I'd say that, briefly for whatever we're doing here this afternoon, I'd say justice is essentially a relationship term or relational term. Justice is a relational term, again, since whoever wrote the question brings in the Bible and all of that. It's a relational term that derives from the creation of the human person. The human person as a relational being is in relationship with God, with one another, and with creation. And when one respects the demands of the relationship in which he or she stands, that's his justice. That is a tzedakah in the Old Testament. So the tzaddik in the Old Testament is the one who respects the demands of the relationship in which he or she stands. When you flout the demands of the relationship in which you stand, that's your unrighteousness. That's you become wicked. So in that sense, the sense of justice being that when you respect the demands of the relationship in which you stand, this is with God, and this is with one another, and then with creation and all of that. So the basic sense then of justice as respect for the demands of the relationship in which one stands invites one to recognize one that human life is lived in a network of relationships. Network of relations, not of which is absent from human ecology or whatever you may want to call it. So human life constructed or based on this network of relationship invites us always into a situation where we need to respect the demands of all of this network of relationships, and that constitutes our rightness to the extent that we're able to respect the demands of all relations which we live in, from the house, from the homes, demands of parents, children, parents, place of work, employee, employer, whatever, any state, IRS and whatever. So our whole lives is just a network of relationship which invites and requires us to respect the demands of the relationships in which we stand. When we understand it this way, the human ecology, kind of brings it alive. If the word justice may appear to be something esoteric or whatever type of thing, it's telling that it's like saying that these network of relationship are what makes our lives human. We live because of this network of relationships. And so calling this human ecology is actually providing a crucial point of reference for the relationships which make a human life, whatever. And all of them are basically justice relationships or justice networks that we live in. So I will not see a tension between the two or an opposition between the two terms. Rather, it's an invitation. It's a way of making a traditional sense come right. I can still understand why that question can come up, because when I talk about human ecology, I do not go into distributive justice, commutative justice, and all of those instances of justice that one can talk about. But at the end of the day, commutative, distributive, or whatever type of justice we can talk about, all of that at the end of the day boil down to this basic respect of the demands of the relationship in which we stand. So the tzaddik is always tzaddik. And the rasha, the wicked or the sinner, is always rasha or wicked, based on how they respect the demands of the religion in which they stand.
Dr. Stroud, Ms. Orr?
I've got nothing to add after that.
All right. It's only appropriate to give the Cardinal the last word. So if we could applaud our panelists here in gratitude.
As our fall 2022 Dehon lecture comes to an end, I want to say thank you. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your thoughtfulness. Thank you for the conversation in which you have drawn us in and these thoughts that you have shared with us. So thank you, Your Eminence, Cardinal Turkson. Thank you, Ms. Catherine Orr, and thank you, Dr. James Stroud, for your contributions today. Thank you to the faculty, staff, administrators, seminarians, and students here today as well, and to those persons joining us via live streaming. I want to thank Seminarian David Sweeney for starting us off with prayer. And thank you to the Dehon Lecture Committee, who was chaired by Father Mark Maston, and with great support from the team of Dr. Paul Monson, Ms. Emily Nolji, and Ms. Monica Meisey. Thank you to Dr. Ben Stone, our Director of Liturgy and Music, as well as many other faculty and staff who have helped make today possible, everywhere from the library, maintenance, food service, finance, IT, communications, all faculty and staff, really. And especially the SCJs, the Dehonians, without whom today would not have been possible. May you be filled with the grace that the heart of Christ brings you. God bless you, and thank you for being here today.